Welcome to the Outer Realm with MicheleDerocher and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night segment of The Outer Realm. We are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 FM from the Gulf Coast, 107.7 FM from beautiful New Orleans. We're fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee who have been a part of our journey for the last several years. So thank you, Folgers. We appreciate you so much. We couldn't do it without you, nor would we want to. Also, big thank you to Justice Snicker, a.k.a. Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, for the contribution of his time, his music, and his voice for the intro you just heard. He is an award-winning composer of Halloween, horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found on all of your favorite music streaming platforms. Also, big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind all of our logos here at the show. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. Also specializes in the horror genre, but does phenomenal completion pieces of any sort. So many familiar faces in the chat. It was great to see you when I was actually being a guest on Ethereal Encounters today. Always great. It was a great conversation. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out. It's a wealth of information, and it was a whole lot of fun to do. Tonight, though, more fun. And I'm just reading all your comments. I promise I will get to everybody. Tonight, my dear friend Jon Sumple joins me. You guys have seen him on, quite a few times. He and Jack Roth. And this one is just the two of us because we're going to be talking about the sky people and the similarities that seem to crisscross all of these, not just that, these ancient civilizations, but within a lot of our indigenous communities and worldwide. It is crazy. Anybody that says that, nobody traveled anywhere past a certain point as we moved along, there's just absolutely no way this is possible. Everything is just so similar, and the experiences are similar, if not exact. And it's just going to be a whole lot of great conversation. So again, guys, we are on 8 different platforms simultaneously. We're on Facebook. We are on 3 different YouTubes. We're on X. We're on Rumble. We are on Roku TV. Roku does not have a chat room. But again, it's like having an 8-lane or 7-lane superhighway coming down to like 1. So we will get to people as we can. I will flash comments up as always periodically. And from that point on, we'll just tag the questions and make sure they get addressed. So without further ado, Mr. Jon Sumple. Hello.
Hey.
How are you?
Now I'm nervous. Like we're like worldwide. We're on 400 different channels simultaneously.
I know, right? A million. we're everywhere. Yeah. Maybe she just have a stiff drink. That might help.
Yeah. Maybe not the coffee. Maybe
I know
a little bit more.
You're just doing it wrong. but I'm really looking forward to this. This is really going to be.
Yeah, me too. It's an interesting story. It's not one that I ever thought that I would be able to talk about. But since I travel, and I should preface this by saying that. So coming up on 7 years. 7 years ago, my wife and I sold everything that we own. We both work remotely. We decided we lived in Seattle that we're going to just go and travel and continue to work. And over the last 7 years, I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time in Mexico and South America and Southeast Asia and New Zealand, Australia, and have had the opportunity to meet and talk to people in a lot of different indigenous cultures. And gosh, you know what? They all talk. They don't even bat an eye when I mention just 2 words, sky people.
Wow.
They know what it is. They don't bat an eye. It's not like a hush hush, except for one situation. I can talk about that a little bit later. But
Yeah.
overall, it's that's the part that really threw me. And ever since I started having these experiences, especially in Mexico and South America,
Hmm.
I've wanted to explore it even further, and someday maybe do a documentary film that focuses on the fact that there are so many different cultures where they're multi-generations ago there was rituals around the sky people and storytelling around the sky people. And why are there similarities between all these cultures, which at the time had no ability to communicate? So, that begs the question, how did they come across this information, and why were some cultures more advanced than others? So, we can jump into all of this.
Let's do it. I mean, why? I mean, you've traveled, and obviously, you're meeting all of these people, getting this information. Was there something specific about sky people that piqued your interest to get you to the point where you were, you were just started digging?
Well, I think I would have to say it started during a visit to Chaco Canyon back in 2001.
That'll do it.
Yeah. So I was there and
Yeah.
learned more about the history in
Mhm.
the ant people, the fact that there was belief that the culture came from, out from under the earth and populated the earth that way. There are other cultures on the other side of the world that believe in the same thing.
It's true.
Um,
It's true.
but when I was there and seeing, it was really the first time I got a chance to spend an extended period of time within an indigenous culture and looking at the architectural components and some of the ritualistic alignments that they have that I never really paid any attention to, other than chariots of the gods and Eric von Däniken stuff way back in the 70s, there, which at the time was intriguing and blew up and people started talking about it, but it was very, very fringe, extremely fringe to even be talking about that stuff. But then when you go and experience it for yourself firsthand, it's a whole different story. And I've seen numerous TV shows and episodes of Ancient Aliens where they visit all these sacred sites and they talk about the things that make no sense. And it's fascinating to see it. But when you go there, because when you're watching it on TV, you're seeing it from this point of view. You're just seeing what's shown on the camera. You don't get to see the immensity of it all around you. And it just is, it's unfathomable when you're in those spots to have those experiences. So, I started in Chaco, learn what I learned in Chaco. And then when I was down in Mexico, I fast forward, 15 years later, I'm scratching my head going, Chaco Canyon and the Aztec and Mayan cultures in central Mexico were contemporaries. Why are the temples in Mexico so far advanced compared to, they even traded with each other? Why was there never this sharing information, and how did they get so far advanced? Because you don't see pyramids in the southwestern United States, but they're all over the place in Mexico.
That's true.
And even in going all the way, we'd spent some time at I think it's Corral in outside of Lima, Peru, a couple hours north, and it's one of the oldest cultures in the planet. It's like over 5,000 years old. There's pyramids there.
Well, I mean, Chile and Peru are like ET UFO haven.
Yeah. And it is. And that really amplified everything for me, was spending time in the Sacred Valley in Peru and having a chance to visit the Nazca lines and seeing all that. And when you see it for yourself and you're up in an airplane looking over the lines and you see the effort that went in to do what they did. And for some people to say, oh, it's just ritualistic. It's like, they had no perspective of what they were creating. How did they create it? How did they know that their proportions were correct? Their distances were correct? It is again, let people explain it away. There is healthy skepticism is good. I don't
have to have it.
Yeah. I don't doubt that at all. And I think that there may be other explanations, but when you're in the moment and you feel something and it resonates with you so much that it's almost like everything you ever thought might be true is validated when you're in those moments. And you feel it, and there's a knowing that kind of resonates inside of you that you're like, this is real.
And I like when you say that, the knowing. It's just so instinctual, and you get that feeling when you're standing on a site like that, almost like it resonates, like you just belong somehow because you just seem to have an understanding.
Yeah, and it's having the ability to do what we've done, and seeing the multitude of different locations in the Mayan culture, and then moving over to the Aztec side of the equation, and the Tolmec, and there's a whole bunch of mechs in different cultures, but they were fighting, they were bartering, they were experts in certain, whether they were fishermen or they had abilities based on elevation, and could do things that the people on the coasts couldn't do. They all had their expertise, and they all had their bartering chips. Some of it was seashells, some of it was opal, some of it was all these different things, different foods that you could use for bartering. But they found a way to connect. But they all, again, they had this common thread of looking to the sky. So people would be like, well, it was because they were astronomers. And it's like, okay, where'd they learn that? Where did they learn, to look into these certain space points? And why do multiple cultures all around the world point to Orion's belt in the Pleiades system? Why is that?
Just look at the pyramids. He's got Orion right over it.
Yeah, so you've got those are laid out in the same way that the Teotihuacan pyramids are in Mexico. It's the exact same alignment. Yeah, exactly the same. So how is that two cultures that are so far apart, not sharing information, having the same, in their engineering and architectural detail is on point. We were also in Angkor Wat in Cambodia. The lines on those are like
precise,
razor sharp lines.
Wow.
Perfect. Like there's a center point in the middle of Angkor Wat that says this is the center point. Yeah. And they knew that because that's where they began all of their measurements from that. So math is a universal language. It's been around forever. But does that mean that simultaneously all around the world at the same time, people were like, oh, if we do this, we can build a pyramid. And if we do this, we can align it with certain, equinoxes, and we can use them as calendars and predictors of, or clocks or whatever that might be. But it was all happening pretty much at the same time in the same eras. I'm sure I haven't studied ancient Greece and Egypt and the cultures in the Middle East to know, and I'm sure those go way, way back. But I'm sure they have the same stories. I haven't visited there yet, but I definitely look forward to going there because I'm pretty sure that we're going to have the same type of experiences there that we've had in these other cultures.
Well, I've been to, to Egypt, and the Great Pyramid, the pyramids of the Giza Plateau are very much in line with the same system. Do you think it's because they've met with an ET race from the Orion system that, why they emulated, or why, they revered them? Or do you think there is something more mathematical for, like what you say, it is for timekeeping?
Yeah, it begs the question of what came first.
Yes.
Did somebody come down and hand them the playbook?
Yes.
And then they said, okay, yeah, we get this, we can do this. Or were they walked through it and shown how to do it?
Yeah.
And why were the Anasazi Indians not either adhering to those engineering marvels that were used and guidelines that were used, and their contemporaries had these amazing pyramid structures only at 300 or 400 miles away? Why were they so different? And there's jade that has been found in Chaco. So they know that there was trading going on with the different trade routes throughout Mexico. So they had to have known. I'm sure it wasn't just a one-way trade. I'm sure people from Chaco had worked their way down south as well. Or at least the sharing of information would have been to a point that they would have been like, oh, you can be more efficient in your building, or you can have better structures as a result of this type of mathematical alignment and building processes. So yeah, and Chaco's fascinating. Have you been there before?
No, I have not.
So Chaco's fascinating because you can see throughout like in a lot of the Mayan and Aztec structures, every time there's a new ruler, they build the temple on top of the old one. So it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So the pyramids keep getting larger and larger. But in Chaco, you can see the evolution of the building advancements, and how the oldest structures are notated, and they're more primitive compared to the newer structures that are a couple of hundred years later, but still nowhere near as advanced as it was in Mexico, just a few hundred miles away. And what it is so fascinating too, the LiDAR technology has uncovered the fact that there's tens of thousands of pyramids that are undiscovered and unexcavated, and maybe one day will be. Maybe not in volume, but as we've traveled, there's been so many different places that we've gone to where you could be standing and looking at one of the temples in front of you, and then you can look to the left or look to the right or look behind you, and there's dozens more that are just covered earth that there's something.
They'll tell you it's a mountain.
Yeah, but there's a lot of that too. But there were certain places in coastal Peru where you could see they had excavated one primary one, but there were two other ones right next to it that had nothing done to them, and they were right along the coast. But in talking to the different guides and people that work there, the message was that we just can't. There's no money to do it. There's no money.
That's
to
huge.
Do the excavations.
Yeah, it's a massive undertaking, and there's so many that I don't think people can grasp. Like China, apparently, and they have so many pyramids there. It's just mind blowing, but they won't talk about it.
Well, some of the larger ones too. There's massive ones.
Massive ones. Bolivia apparently has one of the largest ones. Russia, where they figure it's the cradle of civilization in this part of Russia.
I find that
a huge one as well.
I find that interesting too. As we've traveled, we've been to different countries where it's almost like they're like, well, we're the beginning. It all started here. So there's like these factions all over the world that have their storytelling. But one of the things that I found most fascinating about Peru, and of all the countries that we've been to so far, Peru by far surpasses any other one in valuing their indigenous culture and maintaining the history. I remember going to the one museum, the main museum, archaeological museum in Lima, and one of the things that they talked about was the timeline, and they can date back all the way 10,000 years. Can they go 10,000 years in the U.S. to tell you who was where and what culture? No,
not much.
But they have that all documented, and they talked about when the conquistadors showed up in that region and discovered the Incan Empire. To them, and this was what was addressed in the information that was in the museum. To them, it was akin to today discovering aliens. So they stumbled across something that they did not know existed, that they didn't think could be as elaborate and as grand as some of the structures that existed in Europe. Definitely more primitive in nature, but massive. Throughout Cusco and the Sacred Valley, the structures there are incredible. I think if you've been to Machu Picchu, it's amazing. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But Sacsayhuaman outside of Cusco is incredible. It is probably one of the more amazing places that I've been to because of what I learned when I was there just kind of blew in my mind. So I'd seen shows on this before, when you see these massive stones in Sacsayhuaman that are the size of, gosh, they're probably 15 feet high and 10 to 20 feet wide. They weigh several tons, but yet they fit seamlessly together with the rocks around them. And it's not square, it's round, and you couldn't even slide a piece of paper in between the two rocks. They're fitted perfectly. So I had the pleasure of working with a guide there that took us on a couple of different trips. One of them was to Machu Picchu. And then on my last day, when I was in Cusco, he asked me if I wanted to go and see the Sun and the Moon Temple and the Monkey Temple that are basically up in the hills, outside of Cusco. So you're hiking up into the hills. Fortunately, it was the last week that we were there, so I had acclimated somewhat, because it was pretty much straight uphill hike to get there, and he has no problems whatsoever doing it. But one of the things that is fascinating is the rock that's there does not seem to be carved, yet there are right angles and there's perfection in some of the stone and the way that it looks. And it does not look like it was carved. It doesn't look like it was chiseled. There's no marks in it like that. So the more and more I asked him about this, and we talked about it, and he says, well, what do you think? And I said, I don't know. It looks like there was some sort of laser technology. And he said, people have talked about that. I remember seeing a show once that was talking about that the only way that they could cut stones the way that they're cut in certain areas in Easter Island and also in coastal South America is with diamond lasers, or diamond saws that would cut. That's the only way that they could do that.
Yeah.
So we had this great conversation, and he said, I'm going to bring you someplace a little bit later and we'll talk about it some more. So he's Quechuan, he's indigenous. He had shared many stories about the importance of Pachamama and how they worship the earth. When they open a bottle of water, before they take a sip, they pour a little bit on the ground to thank Mother Earth for giving them this abundance. And there's so much respect for the planet. Just it was so beautiful to be in that type of a culture. But eventually we get to a point where he says to me, now, you remember how you've seen all these rocks that look to be cut and precision? And he said, I want you to look at this ledge. And it was this kind of like I wouldn't say an outcropping, but there was this ledge that was part of this structure that was up out of the earth, and it kind of moved across the open area a little bit. So it wasn't like this one little piece. There was a lot of it there. And he said, what do you see? And I said, well, I see this really smooth area here. I see this kind of rough area here, semi-rough area here, and it's all one piece. It's the same piece, but it looks like somebody had taken the original stone, kind of chiseled away at it, and then polished it. And I said, how did they do that? What type of technology did they use to get to that? And he said, there's belief that they had the ability to change the stone, that they had the ability to soften the stone and mold the stone. He said, that's why all the rocks fit so perfectly throughout the Incan Empire, is
They're
that
molded.
they had the ability to mold, to liquefy the stone and mold it. Because if you all you have to do is go to Ollantaytambo, any of the places in the Sacred Valley. To me, that was one of the most amazing places that we visited. I thought that was more impressive than Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is glorious because of its location.
Yes.
But some of the building structures that were built in these other areas does not make any sense. One, how they did it with stones so large. Two, how they transported them from the river. People say that they mined it 3 to 5 miles away, but then they had to take it upriver, not downriver, but upriver. To the locations, and then move it up the mountains to put it in place.
It just seems like an impossible task. Of course, academia will tell you, "Oh, yes, it could be done." No,
Well,
I
it just,
don't think
again, it's
so.
being
Yeah.
there and seeing they would have had to be super advanced engineering cultures in order to do that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when we were in the Mayan cultures, we talking to the different guides, the number one person was the leader of their tribe, the king.
Mm.
And then the number two person was the astronomer, astrologer.
Hmm.
Then came the priest. So
Yes.
number two was the sky watcher,
Yes. Funny that.
and the most important person in the culture. And throughout the Mayan culture, we heard this over and over again, that the number
Mhm.
two person that had access within the royal areas of the different temples was the astronomer.
Mhm.
Their whole responsibility was to look to the stars and read the stars. So it is quite amazing that there was this study of the stars all over the world for hundreds of, not if not thousands of years, and,
Mm.
and became this understanding. But why certain planets, why certain star systems were picked out in a
Mm.
sky that's so vast that the multiple cultures kind of point to the same ones.
I think,
That's
it just makes me think that we had, a specific race that was visiting here more often, or are we a product of, being brought here by a certain race? There is a really big theory that many of us, not all, because there's many of us that were just sort of dropped here somewhere along the line and modified or whatever the case may be, hybridized, because we're just so diverse. But one thing that holds steady is the fact that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, what type of indigenous person that you are, or Aboriginal, the stories are very, very similar with
Mhm.
different races of beings. But I find it interesting that Mexico just really a stone's throw away from the United States, technically speaking, and the technology just seems to stop.
Right. Yeah. Why? And why is there such a proliferation
Mhm.
of archaeological sites in Mexico,
Mm.
and very few? There are some pretty big ones in the United States, but they're never talked about. The
Mhm.
mounds in the Midwest, and the serpent
Yes.
in the Midwest, and all the different uh, uh, caves that are not caves, but
Mhm.
ritualistic sites throughout. I mean, all over the Great Lakes region,
Mhm.
which kind of points
100%.
to this movement from Europe much sooner than what people believed there was to get to
Mhm.
the new world, so to speak.
Mm. Sure.
But one thing that kind of been leading up to all this is that each one of these locations that I visited,
Mm.
I specifically had conversations with the guides because I understood very quickly that there was a connection to the stars. And I would always ask every single tour that I went on, and we usually would do solo tours, private tours, as opposed to group tours, because
Mm.
we knew that we'd have the opportunity to have more intimate discussions and maybe talk about things that a tour group
Yes.
likely wouldn't want to engage in.
Yes.
And every single time I brought up the sky people, every single time, it wasn't, what do you mean? It was always like, oh yeah, oh yeah. And the only place, and I mentioned this earlier, the only place that it wasn't like that was when we were in Tulum and we were visiting the Mayan ruins in Tulum. And I
Hmm.
asked the guide there, and the guide just kind of looked at me kind of sideways. And this was, I mean, we were with a group in that tour, and there was only like 5 people. I think we were the only English speaking ones there. And so I pulled him aside afterwards and asked, and he just kind of looked at me and just was not having it, just not. And it wasn't like, I don't believe you. It was like,
We
that's,
just don't talk
that's,
about it.
that's sacred. We don't talk about that.
Yeah.
So that was the only time.
Mm.
Everywhere else I've been in Southeast Asia and Mexico and anywhere in South America that we visited,
Mm.
indigenous sites, everybody talked about it and openly talked about it.
Hmm. I mean, I think every indigenous culture has their, their faux pas or secrets that you don't talk about, meant only
Mhm.
for them. I know, even talking with Don Yazzie, he's just some things, for the most part, I think the younger generation is talking more about it. But they even know what the elders will say, or the medicine men will say, no. And they don't. They adhere by that.
Yeah.
So I guess there's always
Yeah.
going to be that one thing or
Yeah,
two
there are.
things.
So at the same time, when I visited Chaco, I also visited the Zuni culture.
Mhm.
There was a Zuni reservation, and went there and visited inside the church that's at the Zuni reservation. And there's these kachinas that are seasonal within there. And there was certain elements that were in there. And the day that we went in there, we just happened to be the day that there was somebody in there painting, refreshing, and working on the kachinas that were in there. And he said, I'm actually the son of the painter who painted the originals in there. And there was a
Wow.
couple of different things that were in there that kind of, not that they were obvious, but there were things that the stars, and looking to the stars. So I asked the question, about the star people. No, again, no one, like, it wasn't like, what do you mean? Immediately there is this knowing. And I said, so is this something that's experienced today, or is it an oral history of days gone by? Both. And
Mm.
as you mentioned, Don, he talks about, one of the things that he has mentioned is that the things that are happening today out in the Four Corners region and Navajo reservation has been happening for centuries, if not millennia. It's nothing new.
No.
They look at the interdimensional
Mhm.
beings and the crafts that land in the mesas
Mhm.
as something that's been happening for eons.
Mhm.
They don't even bat an
They're
eye.
so nonchalant about it.
Yeah.
Don, I got rushed by a Bigfoot and it knocked me right over. I'm like, and yeah, I got up. Wait, what?
Yeah.
They are very nonchalant about certain things, like everyday occurrences.
Yeah. And there are some, explanations that we'll talk about it as
Yes.
folklore,
Yes.
and that these are stories that they turn something fantastic into something real for storytelling purposes. And that's prevalent in Japan and in Southeast Asia, that the thunder and the mountains fighting each other and things of that nature, those make more sense as being like storytelling allegories and things of that nature.
Mm.
But when you're talking to these indigenous tribes, that's not what it is. It's direct communication, or so they believe, with, and I don't remember where it was, but it was like, I think it was in Peru, somewhere in Peru, one of the temples in Peru that we visited, where the person said it was like we were given the playbook. It was like they handed over the playbook to us millennia ago and told us, this is what you need to know. These are the tools that you can use. And we learned. They taught us. We learned about all these different things. And you look at how quickly things advanced from foraging to animal husbandry and farming rapidly around the world simultaneously, without the ability for that information to be shared. So was it seeded in different areas throughout the world at a time where it picked up? Because there were no universities, there were no studies on how to do this, but it spread very rapidly, globally. There was, when we were in Peru, we were talking about transatlantic, how did certain things get from the other side of the world over to here? There's some belief that there was, so you think about at the time, so we're talking about probably 700 AD, so we're going quite a ways back. There was Viking ships found off the coast of Peru. So did they circumnavigate the Cape of Good Hope? Did they go through, North America and come down what were they doing there? How did they get there? What was their navigation abilities in order to do that? Where were they getting their supplies from? How did they survive such a long, long journey to get there?
Yeah,
Quite fascinating.
There's a lot of evidence of being there. Dr. Kathleen Ann Ball talks about even Templars
Mhm.
that have come in, and I mean pre-Columbian.
Right.
But I mean, Vikings, I think it was like 800 or 850 down in the Peru, Brazil area.
Mhm.
So you just come navigate down the coast.
And I think it's fascinating when you
crazy.
find something like that, that
Yeah.
it's not something that rises to the top of
No.
the scholarly world and becomes something worthy of exploration. It's kind of
Mhm.
like, oh yeah. And we all learn history through the schools that we go to,
Mm.
but it's the history that is intended to be told versus the history of what was.
Mm.
So it's like the agenda is thus, or let's all get behind one position and make that the position. And is it the right storytelling? Why do we not know that much about the indigenous people of North America? Just don't.
It's oral history, and I don't think it's meant for everyone. I think you'll find in, again, younger generation, people will be more open to discussing certain things. They're not as guarded. The world is a different place, and they're part of the modern world. I think as you go back, the further you go back into the past, especially now, because with the internet and so on, and all the modern travel, it's so easy to make your way to these places, and you can go in and explore. And when you talk about the Hopi and the Navajo, they're like, oh no, like they've got petroglyphs, and they've got a lot of different stone paintings, and they're just like, no, like, we don't talk about it. Like, they've shown photos of these places, but they have not taken anybody who is not part of their community there to physically see them.
And one of my first experiences with that was visiting Taos. And when I was there, I wound up meeting, went horseback riding with a friend, and the person who was doing the horseback ride was white. He was part of the local, the Taos Pueblo culture. He lived there ever since he was a boy. His mother was a nurse. She came to the Pueblo to help, came to Taos and helped with the Pueblo. And he wound up being adopted into the culture. And so he's like the only white kid, and he grew up there, and he became very close with the chief. And one time my wife and I went back after I had met him a couple months earlier and met with him and his father, adopted father, and talked all about the culture. And one of the things that they were sharing with us is that there are places in the mountains, in the mountain range there, drawing a blank on the name, that no one is allowed to go to unless they're attending a ritual with the indigenous. It's only for indigenous people, and it's, from what they were saying, there is magic in those mountains, and that it's not for public consumption and never will be. It is intended to be just for the people who are part of the Taos Pueblo. And we also were talking. The father was asking us where we currently lived, and we were like, Seattle. And he's like, oh, you need to move away from there as quickly as you can. He said, because when the end comes, and I'm like, huh?
Yeah.
Again, this was 20 years. This was 20 years ago. And he said, when the end comes, he said, it's going to be a water event. And he said, Taos is in the region, in the high desert in New Mexico, is going to be the few areas protected on the West Coast when this event does happen. So it was kind of like one of those moments where you're talking to an elder who's sharing something as if it's a knowing, not like some Nostradamus prediction.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, this is going to happen, and you just don't want to be there when it does. So those were, what I would encourage people who have the ability to travel, and when they go to these amazing places, to not just see the spectacle, but talk to the locals. Talk to the people who are part of the culture, who know the history because it's been passed on. The oral history is probably the most treasured thing in indigenous tribes, North American, Central American, and South American, is that they do have those oral histories. And a lot of the it's not recorded, it's all oral, but it's been passed down for multiple generations. And it still is. And the children learn these oral histories through their grandparents and their great-grandparents, and these tribal rituals that they have, they're passed out. The dances exist, the rituals for the seasons exist. Still, they've been going on for millennia, and they're still going on, and they're still being passed down. So there is a knowing, there is a knowledge of that. And I wanted to eventually get to this story that was probably the most profound thing that's ever happened to me during my travels. Is early on, this was when we were in Mexico, and we were in Tulum, outside of Tulum, and spending time there. And we did eventually went to Merida. And when we were in Merida, we did a day trip to Izamal, and then eventually to the temple there, which is in the middle of the city, even though it's not, the area of it is quite massive. But then we went to Chichen Itza. And we were fortunate enough that because we were coming from Merida, and it was easy to get back to, we weren't going back to the Mayan Riviera, so it wasn't like a 2-hour bus ride back, that we got there late in the day. So we got there around 3:00, and it closed at 5. So all the tour buses from the Mayan Riviera were already gone. And when we got through, we got this guide who was probably in his mid to late 20s. And we were fortunate when we got inside, there couldn't have been more than 100 people on the ground. So it was quite quiet, and made it even more magical because there wasn't a bunch of people running around taking photos, kids screaming, a lot of conversation that had nothing to do. It was people talking about where they're going to dinner tomorrow. That there's no reverence in those places. You could
take in the moment, right?
Right. So we could take it in. We soaked it in.
Yes.
So as soon as we kind of with our guide got to the point where you see the temple for the first time, it blows your mind, and it's like, whoa, this is amazing. So we started getting the regular historical pitch from the guide. He's probably told the same story 100 times, and if you've been there before, that there's a sound, something going on with the harmonics in the area, that if you clap, you could hear it, and information could be passed back and forth relatively easy from the top of the temple down to the people below. And so we were walking around. He was giving us some of the history and some of the highlights. And I wanted to take some photos looking straight on from the temple. And my wife and the guide were about 20 yards off to my left, and they were talking. And as I was standing there looking at it, I'd taken several different photos, and I was just standing there. All of a sudden, my body started vibrating from the inside out.
Crazy.
It wasn't an external thing. It was internal, and it was so overwhelming that I dropped to one knee. It lasted about between 15 and 20 seconds, and it was emotional. I was like, it wasn't like, what was that? What just happened to me? It was like I was a tuning fork and someone pinged me. And I felt like I'm here on these sacred grounds. The Kulkakan is the god of that area. And when I went over to my wife and the guide, the guide kind of said, well, Kulkakan picks out certain people to have that experience, and you just happen to be one of them. And you're kind of like, you were lucky to have it. And it happened 2 more times. The first one was the longest, 15 to 20 seconds. The second time was about maybe 3 or 4 seconds. And it happened one other time, just enough where I was jolted by it. But I felt honored that it happened to me. I still don't know why. I've had some people say it's like, oh, it was just kind of like a retuning of your vibration. It was a preparation for.
I think because you were so accepting of it, and you had not just a healthy curiosity, but you genuinely wanted to be You wanted the knowledge. You wanted to know.
Yeah, and it was that peaceful moment too. It was the
Yeah.
fact that there was nobody other than my wife and the guide within 100 yards of me.
Mm.
It was quiet. It was probably 3:30 in the afternoon. It wasn't too late. It wasn't sun wasn't going down. But after that happened, and this is what changed the whole course of the next 90 minutes. After that happened, I went over to the guide and to my wife, and I told him about it. He explained. And I said, so I have to ask you. I said, I'm a documentary filmmaker. We've made some films on ufology. I have to ask you about the sky people. And his eyes lit up. So the next 90 minutes, we didn't talk about the normal tour. That's all we talked about was the metaphysical components. We talked about the stories that you don't hear,
Yeah.
when you go there. And he talked about the sky people. He talked about the temple. He told us that, and again, he's Mayan, and he said that this is oral history. It has been passed down for generations, that the temple is a portal for time travel.
Shocker.
Yeah. So one of the things, the two things that stand out from that point of view, and if you've ever been into the Mayan culture and you see the different estrellas that have that depict the warriors, and it's basically their art. It's very flat. It's very one-dimensional. Heads are turned sideways or looking forward, but they're always very, very flat, and they're always stylized a certain way. There were two images there that did not look anything like that.
Mm.
One of them was what they now call the Temple of the Bearded Man, and if you go there, you see this portrait, a side portrait, and it looks like Jesus. So one of the things that he was telling us in the storytelling was that when the conquistadors came, one of the things that they did is they made the locals profess to denounce their religion and accept Christianity as their true belief. Mm. Most of them had their fingers crossed behind their backs. They did it because they knew if they didn't, they would be killed. But they then would go off and practice their rituals, in the forests and do their own thing. To this day, there are certain areas within the Mayan Riviera on the coast south of Tulum where they still do that. They still adhere to the traditions and rituals of their elders. But one of the things that he was telling us in that moment was there was belief that this portal became the way of travel. And he said the other image is one that looks like Napoleon. So how did an image of Napoleon show up there? The only way that could show up is if he was actually there and someone had it as a reference.
Yeah, because they emulate and document what they see.
Right. Yeah. Right. Which is what is the most fascinating thing about it. When you think about the simplicity of these cultures, is they documented what they saw.
It's a curiosity, if it was Napoleon, where was the portal on the other side?
Right. So how did they get there? Yeah. How did these likenesses get to a place that allowed these primitive cultures to capture those images, to look the way that they did? When and the thing about those is that that might not be what happened, but why are these two images that look nothing like any of the other images there? Why are they there? And why were they preserved?
That's the key. Why were they preserved? It would have had to have been something very unusual for them to preserve it like that.
And another great story from when we were there is at Chichen Itza has one of the largest ball courts in any of the cultures. So the ball courts are where they had what they called poke to poke. It was a game, and it was a very important game. Some cultures, it was a way of crowning champions. Other cultures, it was a way of executing losers. And it depended on the different culture and how you were treated when you won the game. Sometimes enemies were forced to play against each other, and the winners would be executed, or the losers would be executed, and the winners exalted. The court is massive, and it's probably they would consider it one of the largest ones. There's only one other one that was as big as that one that's known in Mesoamerica, and they carefully preserved. And if you were to walk through it, you would see that the walls are kind of like angled like this, probably more of it's like 3 degrees on both sides, angled in. And that was so the sound could carry up and out from the court, so that the people who were the lower class people who could not come into the court could hear what was going on. So they could hear this and witness this. They also had panels of stone that were strategically placed, because towards the center they were larger, towards the end they got smaller. But each one of them had to be in the right place for this sound effect to work correctly. So at one point, this is going back, I think it was in the 70s or 80s, part of the wall on this one side collapsed into the area in front of it. And when the archaeologists came back that were not of the Mayan culture, they were trying to put it back together, and they could not get it correct. It wasn't fitting. They numbered them, and they tried to get them right, and they couldn't get them right. And a local groundskeeper who worked at the park, who had been watching them try to figure it out, told them at one point that you have the sequencing all wrong. And he went in and he told them where to put the pieces, and they fit back together perfectly. So how could this groundskeeper, this, somebody who is not trained in this area, know where things went and how they worked? And again, oral history has been passed. People understand, the harmonics that were probably a big part of the structures.
Yes.
Those are the things that when you think about, like just even thinking about the Great Pyramids, I remember reading something once that it would take 50, 60 years to build the Great Pyramids with the technology that we have today, because there's no structures and equipment that could do what they were able to do when they did what they did. How is it possible that something like that, the technology that was known, the mathematics that went into it, the precision of the layouts, the connection to the stars, and the fact that there's multiple locations around the world that all do the same thing, it begs the question, it begs at least the asking of the question, who came and gave the knowledge? Where did this knowledge come from? And if it was shared around the world, how was it shared? Were the Vikings going around in their Viking boats and transporting this knowledge, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago? It's puzzling.
I have a friend who's an archaeologist in the UK, and he basically stands by the fact, because, oh no, and this is an open-minded guy. He's written books on different UFOs and crystal skulls. I mean, he's really, really versed and well-researched. And he goes, of course, they didn't have alien intervention. They were able to build them. And I said, how? Because I can't get my head around it. But this is just what academics think. And yet he'll tell you, I don't have the academic mentality. Like, I'm very, very open-minded. And when I stepped out of the field, I even have colleagues who have to keep very quiet, but we'll share behind the scenes, what we really think and so on. But they don't veer away from the Great Pyramid. And I just cannot fathom it, especially when you factor in what's underground or what they just found underground.
Sure. Yeah.
How do you even, now you're not just looking at what's on top. You have to factor in what's underneath. And it's a curiosity to see, if these were machines of sorts, do the other ones have the same thing?
And the fact that there's so much uncovered resources, uncovered structures that
Yeah, you were frozen.
Am I here? Am I back?
You're back. Okay, good.
Yeah, I don't know what
I'm
happened.
like, don't stop
You were
now.
frozen. I was frozen.
Yes.
No, I have a good connection. I waited until I got to Canada to
Yeah.
make sure that I could do this.
Yeah.
But the what was I going to say? I was in the middle of saying it, and
Everything they're finding underneath.
So they're finding the things underneath. There's more to be discovered. There's definitely more to come. And what I want people to kind of think about, when something happens today and it becomes a viral moment or a viral sensation, it could take hours to a day to a week for it to proliferate the world. How long did a viral moment take to proliferate the world 1,000 years ago? Think about that. What technology, what forms of communication did they have in order to, did they send a raven halfway around the world? Was it by boat? Was it by foot? What was the technology, or what was the sharing that went on that allowed this? And if it was simultaneous awareness, based on what was the catalyst that got everybody thinking about mathematics in the same way at the same time?
Well, I always go back to stargates, and some people will giggle. I'm like, no, seriously. The ancients would often build around stargates, portals, portals, vortexes. And down in South America, I think there's one called, it is what was it called? It's called the Gate of the Gods. It's in Peru. And it is supposed to be a very well-known portal to another world or Stargate. And it's near, of course, it's near Lake Titicaca. Did you get to go to Lake Titicaca?
Have not. Nope. That was, we kind of got waylaid by COVID. So
yeah, of course.
we didn't get our way up to Bolivia. We got sidetracked by COVID and stuck in Argentina for a while.
If you get back there, go and check it out. It has got, like they say, according to the Incan legends, the only way that this could be opened was through rituals. But ironically, they link the rituals to the Dropa stones. So if you're not familiar with the Dropa stone, it's an amazing. These things are bloody amazing, and most certainly not from this world. So if that's the case, and if they have that sort of a Stargate, where else do they have them?
Right. And I think, as we did our tour through Central and South America, the one thing that became abundantly clear is that the conquistadors mucked it up for everybody. They destroyed so much of the culture, of the history, but so much of it still lived on.
Yes.
And the reason why they destroyed it, because it was a threat. It was a huge threat to their belief system and to the control mechanisms that were in place in Europe at that time. So for these cultures to, one, bend the knee to accept Christianity, and then two, be smart enough to keep a good portion of their ritualistic beliefs intact and hidden for so long. And so many of the places, like even Chichen Itza, the main pyramid has been rebuilt and I would say restored to look a certain way, because when you're there and you're looking at the two sides that are present when you're in the field, they look, I don't want to say pristine, but it looks pretty amazing. But if you walk around the back of it and you see the other two sides of the pyramid, they're looking like you would think they would look if they were 1,000 years old. So it's a little bit more crumbly. So there's been some restoration to make it look the way that it did, but it brings it into focus, the importance of it at that time. So the biggest thing about the conquistadors coming in and destroying this culture is that they displaced belief systems and rituals with new ones that were ubiquitous in other parts of the world and spread rapidly, to the point where, without the oral histories still maintaining some of this cultural understanding, we wouldn't have anything other than archaeology and anthropology to go back and try to figure out what it was really like.
Mm-hmm.
So we can do the daily living thing, and we can carbon date things, and we can say that things are old. But what I'm always fascinated when I'm in these locations is, what was it like at the time when this was thriving? What were the people like?
Yeah.
What was the belief system? You know, as it relates to the sky people, what was their relationship with them? Was
Mm-hmm.
it seasonally? Was it once?
Mm-hmm.
Was it monthly? You know, how
Yes.
frequent was, you know, there are many people will tell you that they believe that a technology or multiple technologies or the guidebook for mathematics was handed off. And it wasn't, this is how you do it. It's like, here's the toolkit, figure it out yourself.
It's the language of the universe, though.
Yeah.
Numbers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if that was the case, do we have these intelligent beings from other parts of the galaxy and the cosmos responsible for seeding the planet with the tools that helped us manifest the cultures that were in no way, shape, or form connected to each other, but they all built, eventually all, but a lot of them built similar structures. And then you have remote cultures that still exist on the planet today that are very, very primitive. They never had access.
Well, go into the Amazon with
Yeah.
cultures that really don't have a lot of interaction with the outside world. And it's so dense down there. It makes you wonder, do they also have pyramids? And is this part of their oral history, the sky people being sky watchers?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's you know, I don't know the answers.
Yeah, it would be
but
crazy.
It's so easy when you're going into these places and touching the stone that is smooth and seamless, and it's impossible. It is impossible that they built what they built at the size of these structures, the massiveness of the grounds in which these were built. And Sacsayhuaman has just basically the foundational pieces are still there. They said this citadel rose, you know, 4 stories into the sky, but you only see the first 2.
Yes.
So it's like it was this massive structure, and it was ritualistic, and it was the seat of government, and it was the center of it all.
I really do have a curiosity as to what is below it, because, you know, they're not just going to build something as a status going up. I mean, most of the ancient people would go down in case of cataclysm or, you know, enemies coming forward. I know just with Göbekli Tepe, which is one out of, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different sites, that they only had a very small portion of it uncovered. But apparently what was underground was even more substantial, but they themselves buried it. So did, you know, you're looking at a culture that just disappeared. So did the people who built Göbekli. So did the Mayans tend to just cut a lot of this off, or the Inca cut a lot of this off to hide some of those traditions that they passed down?
Well, one of the things too that I learned that I wasn't aware of, and this is probably more common knowledge, but being there in Peru, the Incan Empire was only lasted like 300 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And it's a very short window.
Yes.
But the chief, and I can't remember his name because it's kind of a long one, that his claim to fame at that time was that he united multiple tribes and leaders. He wasn't warring, he united them. So instead of going around and fighting everybody, he united them. And so in uniting them, they were able to rapidly intensify the expansion of the Incan Empire to its glory in a relatively short time period. And some of the structures that are just littered all over Peru, into Ecuador, even down into Chile, is in Bolivia, is incredible. It is incredible.
Yes.
and the trails the trails that connected all of these cities, these routes that were carved in the side of mountains. It is spectacular to see what's left of some of them, and that these people who ran, they were messengers that would run barefoot on these paths. One false step and you're falling 400 or 500 feet to your death.
I know. living life on the edge
Yeah,
had a whole
literally.
different
Yeah.
meaning there. Yeah. I see, that's what I'm saying. Like there's just so much. I've had, I'm just so humbled to be able to travel as much as I have as well. And I love architecture, and I love anything like ancient, and some of the things that I've seen, like when you say, how do they build that? And these are like civilizations.
Mhm.
I mean, I've seen monasteries carved up on the tallest bloody side of a mountain, and you're thinking, look, how the heck did you even get up there? And apparently,
And the
according to
tools, how did the
guides,
tools get up there? How did they, right?
exactly, because I said there's got to be a stairway up inside, right? They're like, no. Would you just drop off a giant eagle? Well, how did it all get up there? I'm thinking Lord of the Rings, right? How?
Yeah.
But they managed, and it's so primitive.
I think, another way to kind of look at it too is that as we have been inhabitants of this planet for millennia. We have scientific abilities unlike any other civilization on this planet at this very moment, yet we're still discovering things we don't know about. So as we find them, we classify them, we understand them on this planet. Why would we not extrapolate that out to the universe and think the same way?
Yes.
If we're finding things on this planet, why would we not assume that we would also find them in the cosmos? And why are we so myopic and earth-centric to think that we're the only ones here, when chances are really, really good that we were nudged along the way of our evolution? And there was something that I read going back, it was probably 25, 35 years ago, a while back, that kind of started me thinking too about a lot of this stuff in a bigger picture kind of way, is that and this is something that when I read it, and it was a scholarly paper, it wasn't some hypothesis formed by some YouTuber, but it was somebody saying that there's not enough time in the history of this planet for the 5 human races to evolve to what they are today. The 5 different races.
Funny that.
Not enough time for that to have happened from an evolutionary standpoint. So they had to be seeded here. They had to come from somewhere else.
Yes. Or quickly hybridized. That's
when you do some research on this, and I remember at the time, and I wasn't using the internet because it was pre-internet times, and doing some research. I think I went to the Orlando Public Library at the time. I was looking into some of this stuff. I was blown away that I was able to find information about this.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, so why is this not common, not necessarily common knowledge, but something that's discussed? Are we that busy with our lives that we don't care about where we come from and what's going to happen to us when we die, or what our place in this cosmos is?
Well, look at it this way. There have been many resets. This we know because there are structures that are being found that are hundreds of thousands of years old. So we know we're not the first, as I say, kick at the can on this planet. So, do you think in these resets that a lot of the information has been removed, like the burning of the book sort of deal,
Right.
but just on a bigger scale? Do you think that's what it is? Maybe a lot of this stuff was in place. Why would an entire civilization, such as those at Göbekli, bury the entire structure?
Yeah, to me, that I find interesting. And when you start to talk about Numeria and I just had a senior moment here. I can't remember what's
that's okay. I'm following, believe it or not.
But the fact that these cultures that purported to exist and thrive disappear. Atlantis, that was the other one. She's the one.
Atlantis, Lemuria.
Yeah, all of these places that we can't get enough information to talk about
Mm-hmm.
rise and fall. But yet we can sit there and look at our recent history dating back, 500 years, 1,000 years, and we can see that there's been a lot of rise and fall
Mm-hmm.
in the world,
Mm-hmm.
that cultures that get to a point where they're too big and they fail.
Mm-hmm.
We saw that with the British Empire. We've seen that, most recently with the German, the attempts in
The
Germany,
Roman Empire. I mean, they
Roman
lasted a
Empire.
while, and
Yeah.
just, you know.
And even, you can go back even further and further, all of the
Mhm.
Persian and the Chinese,
Mongols.
Mongols, all of the,
Yeah.
but they at some point they failed. It's the ebb and flow, I guess, of
Mhm.
these civilizations. And where are we going as a civilization today, and what's the rise and fall that's in our midst right now? That is
How much time you got?
that's a whole nother show.
That's going to bring you on an uncensored version of the show on a Tuesday afternoon. Well, I mean, I think, how much do we misinterpret as well? Because we think of Atlantis, we think an island, whereas now people who are really delving into it are saying it could possibly have been worldwide. And if that's the case, then it would explain why we're finding so many snippets of some of the stuff that Atlantis had, but we're finding it everywhere, right down to the ancient people, the technology, Lemuria. I mean, apparently, when that went down, you can find them in Mount Shasta, because everybody's like, all these ufologists, like, no, you'll find ancient Lemurians made their way down below, up through Antarctica, and found their way as far up as Mount Shasta, but many came up and stayed within South America.
Mhm.
So is that where maybe some of that ancient technology came from? Because if you're getting into Atlantis and ancient Lemuria and other continents that are just under the ocean right now, is that how technology traveled? Were they the ones that had contact and they
Mhm.
moved it on?
Well, even, I mean, again, recent history, when you think about the planet,
Mm-hmm.
10,000 years ago, Ice Age, there
Yes.
were people on the planet.
Yes.
Where'd they go? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's the Anasazi, the ant people,
Yes.
in Central Africa. They believe the same thing. They came from the center of the earth. They came from the ground. So maybe they were just riding out the storm, so to speak.
There's so many, we always say, like, we look to the stars, right? We just,
Mhm.
the ancient people looked up. There's a story that goes back. I'm just trying to dig it up. It's in Africa, basically, but it was talking to an elder, an elder chief, and basically he spoke about reptilians, and he basically said that they just showed up from the stars, came down, and literally took over.
Hmm.
They just literally took over. He said they had these long tails. They was very tall, big yellow eyes. Some of them had 3 eyes, and they were all, he said, like, they would just like look through you, like they were burning. And they were aggressive with people. They spoke telepathically, like everything that, I mean, most people would expect from reptilians. But I think the story eventually broke out, because David Icke,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, love him or hate him, the guy was way ahead of his time on a lot
Sure.
of things. But this, along with the ant people, there's a story in Peru about a reptilian who came up from underground and helped people during cataclysm, brought them underground, cared for them like the ant people with the Hopi, educated them, made sure they were fed and they were sheltered. And there's like a monument in the town, but with this reptilian individual. So I don't know, like, how many were already here, or
Well,
how many remained here? Maybe
yeah, and
that's
I think a lot of it is that our lives are too fast.
yeah.
That we are in an information age where everything's at our fingertips, and instead of sitting with something and letting it resonate and going deeper, we just consume more. We take in more. We're like, what's the next shiny metal object? Let me see the next thing and the next thing. You're never spending enough time with one thing to let it like really permeate your being to the point where I need to know more about this. And I think, Jack and I had the kind of journey that we've been on with kind of the storytelling and filmmaking came from that basic premise is, why are we here? What happens when we die? What's our purpose? And it's like, if we don't stop and think about those things, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because all we're doing, if we don't stop and think about those things, we're just the gerbil or the hamster on the hamster wheel, just running and running and running. And remember back in the 90s having a conversation with a medium, and she was saying that everything's going too fast. Everything's going faster, faster, faster. And she said, we have to get to a point where people stop and start thinking about who we are, why we're here, and having a more soulful relationship with our existence rather than a transactional one. And if we're going so fast and we're ticking boxes and we're complaining about what we don't have, we're not treasuring what we do have, what's right in front of us, what's always been there, what we've probably always known, but have just poured too much into our heads to remember it. I think that's part of it. And it's that there's an awakening that is not about opening your eyes to something new. It's an awakening that is a looking back at what we remember.
It's remembering who you are. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. It's difficult because I truly think the powers that be keep you in perpetual super speed, work, go to work, take the kids to soccer, come home, do homework, make dinner, repeat, just to keep you from pondering some of that stuff. I mean, stuff that's in the food, in the air. There's a reason when somebody works so hard to make you forget, you have to ask yourself, why?
Right.
Why? It has to be something really magnificent that somebody does not want you to remember.
Right. No, when you think about the control mechanisms that have been put in place by those in power who want to maintain power, and this goes back forever, it's always leveraging and taking advantage of the people who don't know or who probably need to know. But it's like, you know what? We're better off, them, the powerful ones, we're better off with them in a box. We're better off with them in the habit trail. We're better off with them believing our version of religion. We're better off with them believing our version of history. We're better off. Yeah, we're better off with them not knowing about the indigenous cultures that lived on their lands. We're better off. We're better off that way. And I think as you peel back those layers, you should be really pissed that somebody has controlled your life to that extent where you're not encouraged, you're discouraged to learn truth. You're encouraged to follow
narratives
that fit the models of these people in power. So, I would, going back, I mentioned the chariot of the gods. That was so controversial back in the 70s, such a huge deal. And now it would be, so we've come so far, which is good. Access to information is right at our fingertips. The world is so much smaller than it was 50 years ago, in the sense that people travel all over the world. I remember the first time I took my grandmother, who was 72 years old, to the airport to fly. And it was like in 1969, 1970. I'm like, wow, this is what an airport looks like. And she had never flown. And now, people fly all over the world and don't even think about it. So we've come so far in a short amount of time. Everything's at our disposal if we choose to find it. If we choose to look for it, if we choose to accept it, if we choose to challenge the norm. I feel like I'm getting up on a soapbox a little bit, but it's some of these things that I I think that I've always known. When I look back at my childhood, I remember as a 4-year-old challenging my parents on the idea of, Christianity, in the sense that, so let me understand this. So when I die, I go up to heaven, I'm on a cloud, I get wings, and I play a harp for eternity.
I don't want to do that.
And I did. I had like this meltdown, and I'm like, this makes no sense. I was crying. I was
Yeah.
on the floor of
Well,
our
it's kind
kitchen.
of scary for a 4-year-old at the same time.
But when you think about that too, and when we spent a lot of time in Mexico recently, we were there for the last 7-8 months before we came up to Canada, and I remember the first time in Mexico decades ago, stunned by the perception of Jesus. Jesus is scary, very, very scary.
Wow.
And if you're a child and you're seeing this, I mean, almost every single celebration has some sort of Christianity figure, and Jesus is predominant in a lot of the celebrations that are religious and otherwise. And scary Jesus is paraded in front of kids from the day they wake up.
Wow.
From the day their eyes open, they're seeing scary Jesus. So there's fear built into Christianity in a lot of Central and South American cultures. And it's sad that that's the way it is. And I remember having a conversation with somebody, and she said, well, we have the crucifix in every room of the house, and we also have it like above the door. And whenever we go out, we bless ourselves on our way out, and we turn around and bless the house when we're leaving. And I said, why so much blessing? She goes, fear. Afraid that if I don't do it, something bad's going to happen. Talk about the massive control mechanism. Bad is going to happen to me unless I follow the rules.
I think that's what it's all about, is following the rules. I mean, some of the poorest communities in South America are the ones who are giving the most, So it's really difficult. It's a big financial thing as well, so you're sort of buying your way, out of, I guess, the fear and into the good graces kind of thing. It's hard to have an understanding, there's so much conditioning out there in all different levels of faith, and some are a heck of a lot more extreme. But, just to break away from any type of conditioning, whether it's from faith, whether it's just from government, whatever the case may be, there's a really deep hidden history that we all come from. And I do feel that if you go to the Indigenous communities, and if you can get some of that oral history, you're going to get it the way it was told and the way it gets passed down. And I really wish that, many of us, like, I was pretty grateful because I had a lot of stories passed down from my family, so I didn't go up fearing the unknown or anything like that, fearing dead people. I mean, to me, that was outstanding. But if you're trying to get any truth out of academic history, being told from an academic standpoint, it's going to be, I think, very status quo. And I think you're going to find a lot more the way you've been doing it.
Oh, and one of the things that we're fortunate enough to do is that our travels have been, we stay in one place usually as long as our visa will allow us.
Yes.
So we're never there for a week. We're not trying to cram everything into a very short window. We're breathing in the moment. We want to spend time in the communities. We want to stay in the neighborhoods where the locals live, not where the hotels are, not where the tourists hang out. We want to find the coffee shops and the restaurants that are, the moms have passed their recipes down for ages and are sharing it with, the community. So, and we've been fortunate enough that we've been able to meet people like that in our journey. We've been invited to, when we were in Bali, we met, and a lot of our connections come from the fact that we work at coffee shops quite a bit. So we get to know the wait staff or the owners or the managers, and we wind up having conversations. A lot of the conversations start with, so what do locals do? Where do you go to eat? What would be a typical weekend, excursion for you? Those are the things that we're most interested in, and we have a chance to have those type of conversations and build relatively quick friendships with people. All it takes is going to the same place 3 or 4 times and asking those type of questions where you're pulled into the conversations. And it was during the Galangan celebration, I think that's how you say it, in the Bali Hindu religion, that twice a year, it's every 270 days, so twice a year you're having these celebrations to welcome back the dead. It's like a 10-day thing where they welcome them back. They put all these baskets and gifts and hang things from poles out. It's just beautiful to see the whole towns transformed everywhere in Bali. But we were invited by, we were talking about what goes into all of these rituals, and one of the baristas that we were talking to said, well, why don't you just come and go to the celebration with my family? And we're like, really? And it's like, yeah, I'll give you, here's the directions, meet me here, and we'll get you all garbed up. We'll wrap you in the sari and make sure that you're dressed accordingly. And it was a small village. And we started by in their family compound. So we met their family, and the one of the moms came out and wrapped Karen in her outfit and made sure that I was dressed appropriately to go to temple. And when we went on the back of scooters to the temple, we went to 2 different temples, but the first one was in the community. And when we walked in there, we were the only white people that were there. Everybody else was indigenous and from this town, and nobody looked at us sideways. They were so happy that we wanted to be there. Everybody welcomed us. Everybody
was a celebration.
Smiles. It was a celebration. They were proud to say that somebody was celebrating with them, and somebody got a chance to experience their celebration with them. And we were so honored, 1, to be invited, and then 2, to attend and be so well received. Imagine, going into a religious structure of whatever religion you believe in another country where you're not from that area, and everybody looks at you like, what are you doing here? Who's that person? Especially if you're of a different color or a different race. Why are they here? And there's more of that than there is what we've experienced in our travels. And it's like, being uncomfortable is probably one of the best things that you can do if you want to have a true experience, and to allow yourself to be in those moments. Those moments have afforded me to have conversations with people about things that you normally wouldn't ask. You're not going to sit down with somebody in 5 minutes of meeting them and saying, so tell me about the sky people. They're going to look at you like, what? But when you're coming from a place of authenticity, and you've spent some time with somebody, in numerous conversations with friends in Mexico about UFOs, everyone's open to it. They're all open to it. When I was talking to a guy that we spent 3 hours with at the temple in the Zocalo in Mexico City, and at the end I asked him, I ask everybody that I do tours with of ancient and ritualistic areas about ufology and the sky people, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I've seen craft." I mean, there was
so
no
nonchalant.
It's like there's a receptivity to it, because again, the oral history and the generational passing of knowledge is something that they embrace. They embrace it. They're not searching for it. And when I go back to the conversation we had with Don, where he was laughing, he's like, we hear these things we see these things on TV where they're like these new discoveries. It's like, these aren't new. Our culture's been dealing it for hundreds of years, for multiple generations.
Painfully in some aspects too. Yeah. It
It is quite interesting having been afforded the opportunity to do what we do, to have so many different experiences and speak to so many different people in different cultures around the world, where they all talk about the same thing.
Yeah.
And you go back to all the different petroglyphs and all the different drawings of what can very easily be said are sky people, because they're all over the place. Why are drawings so similar in multiple cultures around the world, dating back thousands of years, and they look the same? They're drawing what they see.
And there's just a lot of artifacts left behind as well. You can get into so many different things left behind that it's just, there's no way it can be made up. You go into the tomb of Seti the First, you see helicopters, you see UFOs, you see all of that. And I mean, a Seti the First, like it's just, they leave behind hints.
And I think a part of it, though, is I think about those things, because those are like total breadcrumbs. Were they kind of intentional, or were they just? I mean, because the cave drawings, to me, the paintings around the world, they're just what they saw. They're documenting what they saw, and unless everybody had the same, again, using that same. Who gave them the playbook that said that all of their gods are supposed to look like they have big heads and big eyes, and they're bigger than everybody else? Come on.
No,
that makes no sense.
They don't. They've got things on coins that they have found. They have, petroglyphs. Go back into ancient, there's all kinds all over the world. They have cave drawings. You can't miss it. And you get into things like, what about the ancient paintings going back? Like actual paintings.
Oh, right.
By Leonardo da Vinci.
Sure, they have the little crafts,
little UFOs and things like that. I mean, there's stuff going back. The cave paintings of Charma, right? That go back 8,000 years BC. I'm sorry, like it's like right off the hop. There's a whole list of things. Is it on purpose, or is just like I don't know that they cared enough? I mean, obviously they emulated what they saw. They documented what they experienced and what they saw. Is it something more than just that? I don't know. I'm grateful for it.
It would be great storytelling to just say, let's go around to some of the tribes that are, I would say, that treasure their oral history. And spend time with them, and not just go in and ask questions, but spend time with them to earn a seat at the table to have conversations about some of these things. I would bet. Well, there was it the Star Knowledge conferences that were held back in the 90s, where indigenous tribes were brought together, where they shared prophecies about celestial beings. That they were returning, and what's happening in our culture around the world today is nothing new, something to be anticipated. So, and it begs the question: why are so many indigenous cultures comfortable with this, whereas we're led to fear the invasion, type of thing? Is that aliens coming are bad, whereas they look at them as well, they're not bad because they've given us a lot. They've shown us the way, and so many different cultures believe that. And by exploring that, we learn. Why would we not want to learn more about that? I would think that it would make a lot of sense for us to go to what we would call primitive cultures and learn from them, because they probably have access to true history, true oral history, versus fabricated ones that are manipulated in a way to form a narrative of control.
They're also very connected, to the planet, to nature. I think that might be part of why they were chosen. Very humble. They were chosen to accept this. I read a story probably last year sometime in some of my research, a whistleblower. And he basically said he had witnessed a craft come down, and this was a race, of ET, like humanoids. And they automatically went to, this is South America, by the way, to an indigenous group of people there. And they were brought on board. And there were other people brought on board as well. And what he witnessed is that they were taken to a separate area of the ship. And they didn't come back out, and everybody else was escorted off. And according to the people within that community, the indigenous community said no, because we're chosen to go back. To go back. I thought, that's interesting. The word back is very interesting.
Well, the idea that we were seeded potentially makes a lot of sense. I mean, my belief, I think I've shared this numerous times on this show, is that we all come from the same stardust, with the same cosmic dust. We're all connected. It doesn't matter if we're on this planet or somewhere else. We're all connected to Source. We're all brethren.
Yes.
And we spend too much of our time trying to isolate ourselves based on our differences versus celebrating our differences. And
well, think about it. Where did the Mayan or the Inca go?
Oh, the Anasazi in Chaco just disappeared. They were gone overnight.
Yeah, exactly. So where did they go? How do how are you here 1 minute, gone the next? I mean, where, I guess, more importantly, who did they go with?
Yeah, there were certain cultures throughout Central and South America that, as we learned about them, some of them were like in the Incas, they were all kind of coming together.
Yes.
And they built these great cities by coming together. So they may have left the small behind. But other cultures is when a new king comes and says, that old temple's no good for me. I want to build a new one down the block, and they all migrate to the new place. So those things I do understand, that those type of things can happen. But in the cases where, like in Chaco, through the archaeological digs and the research into the area, it's like they left the fires burning. They were cooking dinner and they were like, time to go. We got to leave. And it does appear, based on the research that was done there, that they just got up and left. What would have caused? I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, it was droughts. Well, you're not going to just pack your bags and everybody leave at once.
Especially with dinner cooking. If you have droughts, that means it's hard to get food.
Right. So that is fascinating to me, is with some of those stories.
Yes.
And there's no evidence there was a mass killing. None of that. It's just they ambled on. Where'd they go to? Did they go back underground? Did they go somewhere else? Where did they go? How did they disappear overnight? Fascinating.
It is. There have been stories of people, contactees, who have encountered different ET races, and they're given dire messages. Like, you have to get yourselves together. Your planet is not in a good state. If you continue on this path, you will create cataclysm. You're going to be the end of your race. Like, they try to tell them, but you're telling, like, one guy, you have these indigenous communities that have had oral history for all of this time, and they still adhere to it. And then we have occasional people trying to get the message out, but it's just like the masses go, huh?
Yeah, I would, in an ideal, I wouldn't even say world, in an ideal mindset, you'd have people who would be willing to say, and it wouldn't be we have an agenda. We want to go to Congress and we want to tell this story because we've been treated unfairly. It's just like, let's have a conclave of people who believe that we're here for a reason, and that our shared experience is more important than our individual ones. And we're going to get together. We're going to learn the ways of the world. Probably what the mystic schools were all about back in the day. Let's share information. Let's learn. let's go forth and spread the word and be important in the world based on what you're teaching, not necessarily what you're taking or hoarding or imposing on different cultures. I would just love that idea of, I mean, to sit in a sweat lodge with a bunch of different indigenous people and talking about their belief systems and their historical perspectives and their relationship with the land and how they evolved. I mean, you look at the another fascinating thing in Peru is the agriculture. How I'm forgetting the name of the one site, but they would build these circular impression. I'm forgetting the name of the place. It's one of the well-known places in the Sacred Valley. But they would build these terraced beds down into the ground, and knowing that every level that they would go down, the temperature would be different, and there would be different plants or vegetables that they could grow, fruits and vegetables they can grow at those lower. I mean, we're still talking, we're in the mountains, but there's enough.
So they were aware.
They were aware. They knew that. They knew that if we go, I mean, that's pretty profound. That knowledge existed then. And was that all over the world? Was it in certain places? Was it, just trial and error? Potentially. But it's, I look at it more from this perspective of being curious as opposed to hook, line, and sinker, that I believe it in all. But it's just, there's enough evidence to suggest a healthy, open mind approach to what if this is true? What if the sky people did help? What if they came in and said, here are a few tools that you can use, you'll figure it out?
Yes. I mean, there are contactees and experiencers now that say that they're still doing that. I think we've just been so conditioned to not believe and to question. I mean, people should question things, but I think disclosure. There are people out there who it's already been disclosed too. When you go back to some of these ancient prophecies, stories that have been told to you, what's the key element? Is it cataclysm? Is it, like, what is it exactly that they're trying to warn us about, or that they were trying to relay to these people to protect themselves?
Yeah, and that's what I think. And when, I'm an optimist.
Yes.
So I kind of look at, all the good that there is and the potential that if they indeed were giving us tools, was it tools to, I don't think it was tools to protect ourselves as much as it was tools to connect us. And what we wind up doing, and we've done this for forever on the planet, is the borders and the warring tribes and the our people are better than your people, and even within races they say the same thing. If you're
division
within a culture, an existing culture. I mean, we met, as you travel the world, you meet different people and different cultures and how they perceive each other. And it's like, well, but you're all of the same race. Why? What? Oh no, those are not good people. It's just kind of like, well, that happens no matter where you go in the world. There is this.
Them things don't change.
Reason, those just have been there forever.
Yes. Yeah.
But I look at it's like, in the one thing that I would also say about our travels over the course of the last 7 years is that the one thing that I've noticed is that we're more alike than we are different. Every race everybody wants connection. Everybody wants community. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to have a shared experience. Everyone is proud of where they come from.
Mhm.
and they are proud to show you their humble home. We went to a home in Peru, in a remote village in the mountains, and the guy that we were with, who is now a shaman, he's graduated onto shamanhood.
Mm.
He was great because he was building connections with the local communities, and his niche was that he was building lodging of like 2 or 3 little huts in each one of these villages to bring groups of people into so they could experience the local culture.
I love that.
Awesome.
Yes.
So we finished a hike. We went to this house, and they just embraced us with open arms. The food was amazing. I had hurt my leg, and when I was hiking, and one of the family members gave me a treatment. She had done like some massage therapy and classes, but she was now back with her in her village, and she wrapped my knee with cocoa leaves. I mean, it was just like a really cool experience. But the house was dirt floors. There basically was the cow that provided milk for the family was in the living room, kind of in a pen type of thing, and
Right.
everything was there. But they wanted us to be there. They were happy to share their food with us, and it was an amazing experience. And so many people would experience that and be like, "Oh, those poor people." And like, they don't act that way.
They probably barely have a care in the world where they are.
They're proud. The pride of their communities is so obvious. And when they don't have a keeping up with the Joneses mentality pervasive in their communities, they're in the moment. They're not thinking about tomorrow.
They don't know any better. They don't come from that.
And they're happy. They're all happy.
Yes.
So that's one thing. Again, everybody is more. The people of the world are more same than they are different, and certain cultures that we would look at and be like, "Oh, those poor people." They don't know anything else. They have no comparison, and they're happy. They're always smiling. They're joyful.
Yeah.
It's perspective. And it would be nice. And I think, if we were seated by Sky people and their whole thing was, let's see what happens. Let's see, do they come together or do they push apart? And that would be an interesting petri dish, experiment for them, if that's indeed what the Earth is.
In your opinion, as per areas, did they come together or did they push apart?
Come together, absolutely come together.
Yeah,
there was rituals and things that they were very protective of. I say everybody, like we were embraced in Bali, but there are certain places where you knew, you're like, this is, I'm going to keep my distance because this is their thing. But they were aware of it. They were aware that they were being observed, and it wasn't from this isn't a freak show, get away. It's like, we want you to see this because it's important to us. But just stay far enough away.
Yes.
That you can witness it, learn from it, but this is ours. This is part of our culture.
Yes. So last words on Sky people. Moving forward, even in the future, Sky people.
I think that I think there's an opportunity for us to learn more about our past and our future by having conversations with people who've had generational connections to the Sky people. And I don't know why we haven't done that. Why have we not made an effort to make those connections? I think that would be great documentary film. I think that would be a great personal journey experience to do something like that, and to sit with these different cultures all over the world and learn more about their history with the Sky people, their relationship, and what that oral history is. Was there a handoff? When was it? How has that been passed on from generation to generation? Who's the holder of the information today? Is that information the same as it was 500 years ago?
Yeah, and with the generation of today, will they continue on with that oral history? or does eventually just technology
Well,
work?
that is one thing that I think is a cause for pause. And so one of the things that we did see is that in a lot of these cultures, because of technology, because of the cell phone in the palm of your hand, these kids are seeing the world outside of their rural farm village and being like, I want to live like that. I want to experience that. And they wind up going, to the big city. And the family farm winds up suffering as a result of that. And eventually there's no one left to hand it off to, and it dies off. So there is a chance that, technology is leading us to, like I said, the world is much smaller than it was, 50 years ago. That's the case for everybody. And if there's an opportunity to go from small towns, you've seen it all over Europe. You see it in Japan. There's something like 900,000 empty homes.
Wow.
Yeah, there's quite a few, and it's a declining population situation there more than anything. But you do have cultures that are going away. You have a lot of hillside towns in Europe that are disappearing because
So sad.
yeah, people are just moving away. And there was one town in Italy where the last person moved out of within the last few years, and then now it's vacant, and it's just a weekend place for tourists to come and have dinner.
See, I'm one of those people that would be trying to move into the hillside town. Just be like some hermit.
Yeah. So yeah, this is, I feel like we just scratched the surface with this, but it's been great. I can't believe our time is up.
I know. So much amazing information, and thank you for sharing your insight and your experiences.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God, it is a pleasure. It is a pleasure. Come on anytime you want. Talk about anything you want to.
Okay.
It's a great thing, and I encourage. There's so many people who are listening, and I encourage them to go out and, just don't look down on people because of a certain lifestyle. Just embrace them and maybe take in some of that knowledge, because that's the truth that's out there, and it may be the only shot you get at it.
Right. It's just the simplest thing is to ask a question.
Yeah.
When you're in another culture, just ask a question, get to know the individuals, and you don't want to be intrusive, but you can earn your way in if you're there for more than a minute.
Yes. Well, I have to say, when I was in Egypt and we talked about the curse of Tutankhamun, the older generation were sort of like, oh, no, this is real. You have to worry about things like this. And you ask the younger generation, like, it's utterly ridiculous. Don't worry about it. So you might run into a little bit of that, depending, I think, on the mindset of the youth of today. Hopefully, I think when you have things that are really instilled into you, that it's something that maybe it'll need to be passed down to outside sources to keep it going.
No.
Yes, but thank you so much for joining me.
It's always a pleasure. It goes by so fast.
It does. So thanks to everybody in the chat room. You guys make it that much more exciting. So thank you, Batgirl, passing around the coffee in there, and everybody's coming in. And, of course, Dan Duke just has to order the one thing that's totally obscure, but apparently it worked out. Anyway, thank you all. Next week, guys, on Beyond the Outer Realm, Tuesday afternoon, Carol Ann Iadarola comes in for an uncensored deep dive. Let's just say the world at large. We'll leave it right there. Wednesday night, dear friends and fellow UPRN host Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, Laura Lee Potvin comes in for a conversation about giants, Antarctica, the Grand Canyon, Tartaria, you name it. We're going to talk about it, especially if it's really highly strange, as I like to say. Thursday, another fellow UPRN host, Sean Hazlitt, joins me. We're going to be discussing various extraterrestrial races, especially those that, similar to what we've been talking about tonight, may have had influence on humanity and may still be having influence on humanity. So big thank you again to our sponsors, Folgers Coffee, Justin Snickers, Steve McGinnis. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You have been listening to The Outer Realm on United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 from the Gulf Coast, 107.7 FM from New Orleans. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Jon. And everybody behave. We'll see you next week.